Hey guys, today we will be learning about the graph of a parabola. This is a parabola. There are 3 points required to graph a unique parabola. These are usually the y-intercept and the 2 x-intercepts. However, the syllabus also requires you to be able to determine the axis of symmetry and the vertex, which we will also be looking at. The easiest thing to find is the y-intercept, so we'll do that first. In order to find the y-intercept, you substitute all the x values for 0. So you replace that with 0, and you replace that with 0, all the x's get replaced with 0. So this simply becomes y equals 0 squared minus 2 times 0 minus 3, or simply minus 3. In other words, it is always the constant term, the term with no x's. If your equation is written like this, in a factorized form, you do exactly the same thing. You can replace all the x's with 0, and you will get exactly the same answer. In order to find our x-intercepts, we need to substitute y equals 0. So if this is our equation, this time we replace all the y's with 0. That's all we're doing. In order to find the x values from this, we need to factorize and solve, or we can use the quadratic formula. In this case, we can factorize nicely with x minus 3, x plus 1. If I solve this, I get 2 values for x. X equals 3 here makes it 0, and x equals minus 1 here makes it 0. So my 2 answers are x equals negative 1 or 3. And if you look back at the parabola, you can see that there are indeed 2 answers, one at negative 1 and one at 3. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the vertex. Now the vertex consists of an x value and a y value. We're just going to look at the x value first, how to find that, and then we'll look at how to find the y value later. Remember that this is the general form for a quadratic formula, ax squared plus bx plus c. So when I write my equation, a equals 1, b equals minus 2, and c equals minus 3. The formula for the x value in the axis of symmetry is x equals minus b over 2a. So all I do is I sub my values in. B is equal to minus 2. So I replace my b with minus 2. And a is equal to 1. So I replace my a with 1. And I get an answer of 2 over 2, which is equal to 1. And if you look back at the graph, you can see that indeed the axis of symmetry goes through x equals 1. But the vertex there, that's actually a coordinate. That's not a line. So the coordinate consists of an x value and a y value. So we found the x value, we need to find the y value. To do that, we simply sub in our x value into the equation. So the axis of symmetry was x equals 1. So I sub in x equals 1 to find my y value and get my vertex. So I replace all my x's with 1. I get 1 minus 2 minus 3, which equals minus 4. This gives me my vertex because the x value is 1 and the y value is minus 4. And if you look at the graph, you can indeed see that the x value here is 1 and the y value here is minus 4. So a quick summary, in order to find the y-intercept, you sub in x equals 0. In order to find the two x-intercepts, you sub in y equals 0, you factorize and solve, or you use the quadratic formula and solve for the x values. In order to find the vertex, you use the equation x equals minus b on 2a. Once you've done that, you sub your x value into your y value to find your y value. And what I've written there is just the mathematical way to represent that. Okay, one last thing before we do a question. If the coefficient of x squared, that is this a term, if a is greater than 0, here we go. So if a is greater than 0, then the parabola is said to be concave up, or happy face. And if a is less than 0, then the parabola is said to be concave down, or sad face. So an example of a happy face parabola is y equals x squared. The coefficient of x squared is 1. So that's positive. So the parabola is a happy face. And an example of concave down is y equals minus x squared, where the coefficient of x squared is minus 1, which is less than 0, and that is sad face. If we have a happy face parabola, then when we find the vertex, we will get a minimum value of the parabola. That is the lowest point, because every other point will be above it. On the other hand, if we have a sad face parabola, concave down, when we find the vertex, we'll be finding the highest point, because every other point is below that. Now, very importantly, it is possible to have a concave up or happy face parabola that is entirely above the x-axis. If that is the case, there will be no solutions when you sub in y equals 0, because y equals 0 is this line here, the x-axis, and the parabola doesn't cross the x-axis, so there will be no x-intercepts. Similarly, it is possible to have a concave down parabola entirely below the x-axis, in which case, when you sub in y equals 0, once again, there will be no solutions. Okay, here's our first question. Let's have a look at this one and see if we can find all the significant points. For the y-intercept, we sub in x equals 0. That gives us 0 squared minus 6 times 0, which is 0. Next up, we're going to find the x-intercepts. So I sub in y equals 0. So 0 equals x squared minus 6x. And I factorize and solve. So 0 equals x outside of x minus 6. And my two solutions are 0 there and 6 there. Therefore, x equals 0 and 6. And lastly, I need to find my vertex. So I use my equation, x equals minus b on 2a, which is minus 6 on 2 times 1, which is 6 on 2, or 3. Once I've found my x value, I then sub it back into the equation to find my y value for the vertex. So y equals 3 squared minus 6 times 3. That's 9 minus 18, which is minus 9. So to summarize, I found out that my y-intercept is 0, my x-intercepts are 0 and 6, and my vertex is 3 and minus 9. So when I plot my graph, the points to note are that the y-intercept is 0. That is, it crosses the y-axis at 0. The x-intercepts are 0 and 6. So it crosses the x-axis at 0 and 6. The vertex, down here, the vertex is 3, negative 9. Okay, and you can see that, there you go, it's 3 and negative 9. The other things that you need to do when you're plotting your parabola, you need to make sure that you have arrows on the edges of your graph to show that they go on forever in each direction. You also need arrows on your axes to show that they go off forever in each direction, and you need to label your axes, for example, y and x, like that. You also need to label your graph. So this graph is y equals x squared minus 6x. And that will get me full marks in an exam. And we can also see, because the coefficient of x squared is positive, that we have a happy face parabola.